Welcome to AusBizAsia. I'm Sarah Clark. Coming up, we meet the Australian woman in Shanghai who pioneered fine dining and shares her recipe for success. And the entrepreneurial couple in Hong Kong who put their design and publishing backgrounds to good use and started their own magazine. Plus the professor with 40 years experience in eye care whose self-funding global institute is now delivering glasses to millions of people around the world. The quality of air and the high levels of pollution can be big problems in a large part of Asia. And while some economies are strategically targeting ways to reduce greenhouse gases, it's often the case, particularly in this region, that business is taking the lead. Well, one Australian man, Anthony Dixon, is leading the charge to produce cleaner, low-carbon alternatives and what he believes is the fuel of the future. Anthony Dixon has spent most of his career as an investment banker in New York, London and Tokyo. It's not how he thought life would end up. After all, he'd studied physics at university in Western Australia, a far cry from the cut and thrust of global finance. But 3 years ago, he decided to return to his scientific roots.
I spent about 15 years in the financial markets globally, and it's very abstract work, and after 15 years I decided I want to give myself enough runway to do something else, and my passion really is renewable energy and the environment.
It's his desire to help solve these environmental challenges that's driving this reformed banker. He spent 9 years living in Asia, and it's here where he sees the business opportunities and the need for change.
Asia is where a lot of the growth in carbon emissions is going to come from over the next 50 years. And I think, it's hard to generalise, but regionally I think more needs to be done in this area out here. So having spent time in my previous career out in Asia, I was very happy to come back here.
As the CEO of the largest biodiesel plant in Hong Kong, his goal is to drive growth in low-carbon alternative transport fuels around the region. And this plant produces biodiesel made from waste, one of the lowest carbon transport fuels currently available.
We're producing a fuel that has lower carbon dioxide emissions, and the fuel also reduces roadside emissions that contribute to air pollution.
The chemistry isn't new. 24 million tonnes of biodiesel is produced around the world every year, mostly from vegetable oils that are also used for food. But what sets this plant apart is its ability to use a range of waste materials. This includes used cooking oil and grease trap oil, animal fat and various types of highly acidic wastes.
We don't use raw virgin vegetable oils, we use waste, and we have to recycle the waste, and it's a very labour-intensive exercise to collect all that waste.
This is one of the world's most advanced facilities of its kind. Once the waste is delivered, it's pre-treated to remove the water and impurities. The oil is then reacted with methanol and potassium hydroxide, a catalyst to create crude biodiesel. It's then distilled to meet fuel quality standards. And the plant is highly energy efficient, recycling its own byproducts to meet most of its process heat requirements.
What we specialise in doing is transforming this, which is dirty kitchen wastewater, separating the grease from it and transforming it into this. It's pretty obvious that that's a much harder, much more challenging chemical process.
At full capacity, the plant can produce around 100,000 tonnes a year. That's enough to supply around 10% of Hong Kong's road sector needs for diesel, avoiding about 250,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide emissions per year. Although some 62 countries mandate the use of biodiesel blends, Hong Kong has yet to follow suit. So instead, the biodiesel produced here is exported to Europe and the United States.
Well, the European market's the largest market in the world. From memory, about 12 million tonnes a year of biodiesel are consumed annually there. It's very well regulated, and there's a very clear policy objective to increase the use of renewable fuels in the overall transport fuel sector by 2020. Every city should have one of these. I think every city has those three problems. There's a waste issue, there's an air quality issue, and there's a climate change issue. So we now have developed the expertise in constructing these plants and developing the supply chain and producing the fuel. And we're very keen to replicate the success of this plant in as many cities as want to attain us.
But biodiesel does have its critics, who question the fuel's net environmental benefits and argue that it consumes resources that should otherwise go to feeding people. Anthony Dixon says the technology used at this plant fully addresses those concerns, and the future lies in producing transport fuel from waste.
It's possible to make biofuels well and to do biofuels badly from a sustainability and environmental point of view, and there's a lot of attention being devoted to getting it right over the last 5 years, and I think as the technology improves in the next sort of 5 to 10 years, we'll see the end of biofuels made from crop oils, and they'll be replaced entirely by biofuels made from agricultural waste.
In a place like Hong Kong and across this region, where air quality is not only a health concern, but also becoming an issue of economic competitiveness, the drive to find a clean fuel mix is being powered by business. But for this Harvard Business Scholar graduate and reformed banker, this is more than just a commercial and scientific challenge. It's also a matter of the legacy we're leaving for future generations.
No question that the path we're on is unsustainable. You know, the IPCC says we're on a trajectory towards 2 degrees of warming. The US Department of Defense says that climate change is a threat multiplier, and that they recognize it as something which could catalyze additional regional conflicts. So it's a very serious issue. So as a father and as a scientist, I take those things pretty seriously, and there's no question in my mind that we're not doing enough to arrest that, to change that trajectory.
With a successful culinary career spanning more than 25 years, Michelle Garneau is regarded as an industry celebrity in the restaurant trade. She's a pioneer of China's fashionable dining scene and attracts a loyal and high-profile clientele at her restaurants in Beijing and Shanghai. But she's also pioneering international projects in China and continues to expand her role in helping others. Michelle Garneau, thank you very much for joining the program. Now, you're considered an industry celebrity in this region, and you've got restaurants and bars across China. How have you done it in such a competitive environment and also being a foreigner?
Well, you know, when we first started to look at opening something in China, which was about the mid-90s, it was a sort of vague idea in the mid-90s. Actually, it was a bit of a joke, really, in the mid-90s. Like, you can't be serious, you're going to go and work in China. It was like an exile, place of exile in those days. So when we first looked at it, there actually was really no competition. So that, first of all, you know, eliminates that, answers that question. Of course, now there is much, much more competition. And as things have gotten tougher from a business point of view, that has become more noticeable. You know, I think when everything's thriving and everybody's busy, competition's great, it's healthy, but when things get a bit tough, people are not maybe quite so magnanimous about competition.
We're here at M on the Bund here in Shanghai. Now, it was the first international standard independently run restaurant and made this fine dining strip along the Bund what it is today. How difficult was that getting started, and how have you seen it change?
When we were getting it up and running, I thought nothing could be more difficult, but you know, I had no idea the difficulties that lay in store for me. It was really, there were different problems at the time. You know, actually, this building had a canteen, so we sort of snuck into this building on the basis that it had a canteen, and therefore we could open a restaurant in it. Also, what's quite interesting was that we were here for 5 years by ourselves. It was 5 years before the next restaurant opened, which I was sort of, I thought, what are they all doing, you know? Like, and we were really successful. And now people say, oh, it's a no-brainer, this place. And I think, well, you know, you might think so, but, you know, at the time, even friends, you know, sort of behind my back, so-called friends, were like, oh, it's bound to be a failure, it's bound to be a failure, you know, she's a foreign woman and she doesn't speak Chinese, and it's bound to be a failure. And I think we were just, you know, in many ways it was the right place at the right time. And it took 4 years from when I first started to think about it to when we opened.
You've been described as that really rare thing, a tough businesswoman, but also a total bleeding heart. That leads me to your charity work. What triggered you to go down the humanitarian path?
Basically, since setting up a business in Hong Kong, we always, for me it was went hand in hand, you know, we always did you know, something involved in the not-for-profit sector, whether that was working with handicapped kids or, you know, when we did lots of things in Hong Kong that we tried, and some were really difficult. I sort of looked around at doing different, what was doable and what was possible. I mean, there was definitely a lot of need. One of the things we wanted to do at one point was start a soup kitchen. And the local government officials laughed at us and said, you know, half of Anhui profits is going to be moving to Shanghai if you're going to be feeding them for free 3 times a day. Anyway, those days have changed enormously and that didn't happen. But I think it's really important to belong and participate in a community. I think especially if you're not from the community, I think it's even more important. And I think it's important to work, you know, at a grassroots level.
You've also been recognised and won awards for your roles mentoring and supporting women. Tell us about that role, helping women do business in China.
I think you're more approachable as a woman. Somehow people think you've got more time. I mean, you don't necessarily have more time. People say to me, because I'm not in the restaurant all the time, what do you do? I say, I have my nails and my hair done every day. And well, what do you think I do? I mean, I run a company with 200 people. Nobody would ever ask that of a man. What do you do? If you're not waitressing, what are you doing? You know, going back to that point, I think that you're more approachable, and I've always had a lot of people come and approach me in business saying, I want to do this, you know, can I talk to you? And I met somebody yesterday for a couple of hours. I think it's really important, in my view, it's important to give people nuggets of advice and try to pass on your information. It's also, in my view, extremely important not to guide people and not to lead them and not to sort of have them reporting back to you all the time. I don't actually agree with that long-term mentorship.
And how has it been being a woman and being a successful businesswoman and working in a place like China?
I actually think China is quite an easy place for women to work. In a way, it's, you know, it's a deeply, deeply sexist society, and it's a deeply patriarchal society also. But the Chinese have a great respect for business. You know, so anybody doing any sort of business is, you know, fine by them. So I think in many ways you don't have that sort of hurdle. You know, I don't get treated like somebody's secretary. You know, I'm probably also big enough and you know, now old enough as well for that not to happen, you know. You hear that, I hear that from young Chinese women sometimes who run, you know, they're young and they're beautiful and they're smart, and they walk into a room and everybody sits around saying, where's your boss? And it's like, well, actually I'm the boss. But I think people have gotten used to it, and once you're over, if there is any embarrassment or any initial hurdle, it's finished and it's gone and nobody's holding it against you.
And are there any more restaurants in you?
I think not in China right now. I think China is, just from going back to a business point of view, I think China is in a tough place for business right now. I think there's been a lot of expansion, people have been careful with money. Government sort of policy has affected all businesses, you know, hotels, everything, whether you were a place that government people ever used, which is we weren't and we aren't. Still, I think all business has been affected. So I think at the high end, I'm not sure that there's much more scope in China right now. I think that the scope is also for new, fun, younger, things geared towards a younger market. I think that there are still opportunities in Hong Kong, and right now I'm actually actively working on Hong Kong and Bangkok. You know, China's a great place to work, and it's, you know, a great environment to work in, but boy, it's hard work, you know, and it can be really, especially when you get this sort of situation like a change of government, you know, where people are sort of pussyfooting around and haven't really decided what, you know, what the policies are. And I mean, the policies are decided, but I think that it's a time to sort of consolidate in China and not to be expanding. For us, you know, for other people that might be very different. You know, different businesses, it might be very different, yeah.
Michelle Garneau, it's been a pleasure having you on the program.
My pleasure, thank you.
The last decade has seen a global trend of magazines being pulled from print under pressure from either the recession or digital media. But that hasn't deterred one ambitious interior designer in Hong Kong to take the bold step and start her own magazine. After writing a successful blog, going to print appeared to be the next natural step, and she didn't have to go far to get publishing advice. After months of writing, reviewing and compiling, Susie Annetta is watching her hard work go to print. It's not only a relief, it's a huge sense of achievement and a career ambition fulfilled.
Yeah, it has been hard. 6 months of a lot of hard work, of course, late evenings and long weekends, but we feel like it's definitely been worthwhile. We're really happy with the end result.
The end result is this, a quarterly magazine that showcases art, interior design, architecture and travel. Susie says the reason for compiling it under one cover was to fill a void showcasing the creative and cultural scene in Asia.
Surprisingly, there's been nothing that has really catered to those people. So we've really had great support, great feedback, and I think that they didn't really understand or didn't realise that there was something missing until we kind of put it in front of them.
Originally from Melbourne, Susie is an interior designer by trade and has a blog called Studio Annetta. Since arriving in Hong Kong 9 years ago, she's established a loyal following from the design industry across this region. But her blog has a solid global audience and last year attracted 250,000 hits.
I wanted to share news and my thoughts and views on certain things from around the world, and the blog was really one of the kind of, I guess, the seeds or the beginning of the magazine. It was how do we turn that into something else. So the magazine is very much me.
The 190-page journal is full of profiles, travel pieces and editorial, and targets not just the design aficionados, but the design obsessed. But is the market ready for another magazine? Going to print was a bold decision at a time when the industry is contracting, but Susie is optimistic.
I mean, and everyone's saying that print is dead, but I definitely don't agree with that. It's a different experience to viewing online. So yes, it's a risk, but we're still very optimistic about the future.
When Susie came up with the idea, did you think?
Lord, no, not a print magazine. My idea was to do it digital, do it very skinny and cheap, and the more we looked into it, the more we realised advertisers wouldn't really be attracted to that.
Phil Annetta is Susie's husband and comes from a publishing background. Despite some initial enthusiasm to go online, he believes there's room for niche publications.
People see prominent things like Newsweek shutting down their print, and they say, oh, print's gone. But actually, there's probably more titles being published than ever. I think if you can attract an audience with some good content and put them together with the right advertisers, it's still a very viable thing to do.
Frankie Yun is the art director and the brains behind the strategic approach to make the journal stand out. Design Anthology not only feels different, but its size is unique.
Hong Kong, there's so many magazines in the market, and if you don't stand out, how it looks, how it feels, actually people will ignore or even don't know about your magazine. So stand out is quite important about that.
Tonight is the editorial team's chance to shine. The who's who of the creative set is here to toast the magazine's official debut.
What struck me about the magazine is, it's got beautiful imagery. There's not much ads inside, and it's really about the content. So I think it would work, and it's got a good mixture of kind of the tropical architecture, Southeast Asian feel to it. So I think it is relevant. Yeah, it's been amazing actually. I really did not expect the amount of people that were going to be here. The response that we've received has just been incredible actually, and it's really all that we have worked towards, just to get that feedback from people that have instantaneously said that they love the look of it, they love the feel of it. So for me, it's just been incredible to have everybody here to celebrate with us and to get the feedback that we've been working towards.
That feedback has translated to sales. Design Anthology has now been shipped to China, Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand and Australia. It's also in the US, the Middle East, Europe, the UK and North Africa. Combining their design and publishing talents has so far been a business decision that's paid off.
We've had a great response, but of course for us to continue doing this, it needs to be commercially viable. We are very optimistic about it. We got some great advertisers and we've received some wonderful support from the design community here, which is really encouraging.
And working with your husband?
It's been fun actually. There's been a few tense moments. He may say differently, but it's been, I think, a good way for us to put both of our talents together and create something that's our baby, I suppose.
He spent 40 years working in eye health and vision care, and his institute has raised more than $1.3 billion for education and humanitarian funds. Brian Holden has changed the lives of millions of people with vision impairment and trained eye care specialists around the world, including in China, India and Vietnam. And it's the Institute's ongoing research and breakthrough technology that's made it a self-sustaining business on a mission to eradicate blindness. I spoke to Brian Holden after receiving his most recent honour, an Australian China Business Award. Professor Brian Holden, thank you very much for joining the program. Now, your work in vision and eye care research spans a number of decades. Tell us why you went down the path of creating the Institute.
Well, actually, I didn't actually look to create an institute. What happened was, when I graduated as an optometry student and went to England, did my PhD and then came back again, we just started doing research and development, science and technology, and we just followed our nose, so to speak, on what were the most interesting and relevant things at the time in vision care and vision correction. And that, for me, at the time, was contact lens research. And by following through on contact lens research, we end up today with an institute that has 6 centres around the world and 300 people working for it. And now we're spinning off 4 commercial companies to bring products to market. So it was never planned, it just happened. When we started doing our research in 1971 on soft contact lenses, about 1976 we, myself and a couple of my colleagues, went around to major world conferences and found that the research we're doing in Australia was actually front end. And we started to do a lot of consulting work with industry and developmental work and so forth. And that partnership with people spread into partnerships in the area of blindness prevention. And now we have about 150 people based in Africa and Asia, about 100 people based in Sydney, and about 60 people based in China, and another 40 in other parts of the world.
And adding to that, you now have more than 400 eye care sites that have treated more than 2.5 million people. That must be rewarding.
It's the people that I work with and the people that we collaborate with that make this job fantastic, make it extremely rewarding.
And what triggered you to go down the humanitarian path?
Well, I guess back in 1965, when I was very young, I got married and jumped on a boat with my wife and went to Papua New Guinea and to Sri Lanka, Ceylon as it was in those days, and I had never really been confronted with poverty and malnutrition. And when I saw how badly people had in terms of the quality of their lives and lepers in the streets in Colombo and so forth, I thought, this is ridiculous. I mean, it's absolutely sad. And then when I graduated as a PhD in London and came back to the University of New South Wales, we started doing a lot of research and a lot of collaborative research trying to find out how to produce better circumstances for the eye, better contact lenses, better spectacles, better surgical techniques. All of these projects sort of took over my life. So to cut a long story short, we started an organisation called the International Centre for Eye Care Education to develop the human resources, which merged eventually with the Brian Holden Vision Institute. So what we've done is taken the core science and ingenuity of our researchers, developed products, made money. We make about 30 million a year in royalty fees, plough that money in to developing programs to prevent blindness and avoid the future blindness for millions of people around the world.
Your #1 program is in China. Tell us about that.
We came to China 30 years ago because there was a massive problem with contact lenses being sold by untrained people, and there were a lot of infections. And we started to work with the universities in teaching the teachers about contact lenses, and then teaching the shop managers about contact lenses and the need for hygiene and proper procedures and so forth. And that was very rewarding from the point of view of establishing education in that area. And then about 20 years later, almost, in 2010, we started up a project on a gel intraocular lens, which means when you have a cataract and you take it out and you put an intraocular lens in, you can see at one distance, but you can't see at all distances. And they had magnificent facilities at Zhongshan Ophthalmic Centre at Sun Yat-sen University in Guangzhou for doing primate work in the area of ophthalmology and optometry. So we were testing the gel, and then we started to realise the massive problems that were occurring with myopia. So we thought, well, here in China, There are 600 million myopic people, and every year 10 million kids become myopic. And the tragedy is that 20% of them go above what we call 6 diopters of myopia. And with high myopia, the risks of cataract and glaucoma and retinal damage reach the point where high myopia is the #1 cause of blindness in Japan and in Shanghai and many other parts of China. And we need to stop it.
Now, on the business side of things, you mentioned the $30 million that you get from the royalties from the contact lenses, but how do you get investments and finances to support your research and your work?
It sounds like a lot of money, and it is, but for example, one of our co-inventions with industry, the high oxygen permeable contact lens, has sold about $25 billion worth. We got 1%, we got 250 million. Now we want to move up the supply chain, so instead of getting 1%, we get 10%. In order to do that, we have to establish our own companies. So for example, we went into the United States, we bought a company that was making advanced retinal cameras and ploughed some more money into that company, and it will come out with the most advanced, lowest cost by a factor of 5, retinal camera that can be put in a community centre in Malawi and take a picture of your retina and say to the technician, this person has diabetic retinopathy, you need to refer them to the local. That sort of social entrepreneurship into the commercial world. Now it's got to be a commercial success, but put money back into the research, education and blindness prevention hub, which is our institute.
You've been recognised globally for your work and you won a medal of the Order of Australia. What's next for you?
It's scalability, and it's seeing the work that we've set in place actually come to fruition. We might be delivering vision care to a few million people. We have to reach 600 million. We have to take not just retinal cameras that take pictures of the retina, but diagnose conditions and have hundreds of thousands of them in every shop, mall, place where people can get screened. In terms of myopia, we've got 1.4 billion people who are myopic, and they're at risk. And by 2020, there'll be 2.5 billion people who are myopic. We need to slow the progress of myopia so that the high levels of myopia and the high risk is dropped. There's massive things to be done, and I would like another 72 years to do them.
And from a personal perspective though, there must be a sense of achievement?
No, really, to be honest, it's just a start. You know, there are magnificent infrastructure and wonderful people in place. We've started it. We've got a long way to go. And when we've moved on from what's the most important thing you can do to prevent blindness, to correct refractive error, then we need to move into health. You know, what is the best thing we can do to avoid these things? Preventative health. How do you prevent cataract? And there are just a magnificent number of questions in our business, because if possible, we all like to have optimal vision to do our work, to enjoy our lives. And we have an opportunity to do that for the 10 to 15% of the world's population in need. It's tremendously rewarding, but it's the people I work with who do it. You know, I just collect the best and get on with the job.
Professor Brian Holden, thanks very much for joining the program.
My pleasure.
That's it for this episode. Tune in next week to see more stories about Australians doing business in Asia.